is caused when a well loses integrity. And tragically, over the course of its life, every well will lose integrity. But the oil industry will claim that this is the only cause of contamination. And the reason it does this is because if a well loses integrity, then in theory, they can bring in a workover rig and repair it, in theory. The reason that they refuse to acknowledge that there's any other form of contamination is because if they acknowledge that there is contamination caused by breaches in the geology, then they would have to acknowledge that the process is inherently unsafe. And this is the issue. What you see in this animation, of course, is the perfect frac job. In other words, the fluids have been pumped down the well, and they go through the perforations and they go into the target geology. And what you see here is it's so perfect, the calculations are so accurate, that the fracs stop just before they reach the edge of the geological strata. That's a crock. An absolute crock. Because no geologist, no petroleum engineer, and certainly no chemist can calculate exactly what's going to happen. In fact, even, you saw this is an 8-stage frac, the behaviour of the geology on the first stage of the fracs may be very different from the next stage and so on. In fact, I'll show you a little later a photograph from earlier this year of what happens when the geology actually doesn't do what it's supposed to do and fights back. So in reality, the objective of the exercise, of course, is to maximise the increase in production. And in an unconventional well, the production to start with is basically zero because there's no natural pressure. So they've got to make the well viable, they've got to create some pressure. So they're doing that by opening up the geology and creating this artificial porosity. If they were able to keep it in the target geology, if they were, then obviously the oil or the gas in this case would simply move up the well. But the reality is that client companies always want to maximise the aggression of the frac job. In other words, they want the maximum toxicity in the frac fluid. So in opening up the geology, what they're also doing is creating artificial porosity into adjoining geological strata or fault lines. And if the adjoining geology is more porous and a fault line is a natural pathway, then obviously this gas or oil, the hydrocarbon that's been locked in the tight geology for millennia, all of a sudden is free. And from that point forward, it's on a mission. And its mission is to find the path of least resistance. And it'll just keep on going. You know, and I've heard suggestion that, well, how about if you just have a zone of a mile around the well and nothing within that mile? But it's an irrelevance. Because once you've unleashed this in the geology, you have no idea what is going to occur. And the problem might hit in a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years, 20 years, 100 years, 200 years. Nobody knows. 25 years ago, somebody made the suggestion that the companies who were responsible for the fracking process should add dye to the frac fluid. So that in the event of overt contamination, then the dye would reveal the source. So funnily enough, the oil industry has resisted adding dye to the frac fluid for 25 years. Because they know damn well that if they add that, then it's going to become pretty evident that there is a problem with cross-geological contamination. So that's one issue. The release of the hydrocarbons in the tight geology. And by the way, even though the oil industry says it never happens, interestingly, in the EU, there is actually an EU regulation that requires any company injecting foreign liquids into a geology guarantees to keep them in the target geology. So by definition, the fact that there is legislation covering this in the EU means that somebody recognises that it's a problem. Although the oil industry claims it's never happened. So, issue one, the release of hydrocarbons from the tight geology into more porous geology. And what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you some video footage from Australia. And the reason I'm going to focus on Australia is because the video footage is from November last year. And the area of Australia that I'm going to focus on has only been drilled and fracked for the past 4.5 years.